Hello, my dear friends. Today I will tell you a mysterious story about the enigmatic hero Clinks, the Bone Fletcher. Part 1. In the distant lands, where the bleeding hills meet the endless sky, lies the giant forest of Hova, a place of ancient magic and untold secrets, where dark pools absorb the resinous blood of the mountains, concentrating powerful energy in the crowns of centuries-old trees. The air is thick with the scent of pine and the hum of unseen creatures, and the shadows dance with a life of their own. Ruling over this enchanted realm is the magnanimous King Sotherex, a mage of unparalleled power. His castle, carved from the very rock of the bleeding hills, stands as a testament to his strength and wisdom. From his throne room, adorned with tapestries depicting the history of Hova, he governs with a fair and steady hand. Despite the enormous concentrations of energy that flow through the land, King Sotherex maintains peace not through magic alone, but with the aid of his loyal army. Among his most trusted warriors are the archers of Hova, renowned throughout the land for their unmatched skill and bravery. Every year, the best hunters and archers from the surrounding villages gather at the foot of the Bleeding Hills to compete in a grand tournament. They come to prove their worth, to earn glory and the favor of their king. It is a spectacle like no other, a display of raw talent and unwavering determination. As the sun rises over the misty forest, the competitors assemble in a clearing before the king's castle. The air is electric with anticipation, and the crowd hums with excitement. Among the sea of faces, one stands out, a young man with eyes of piercing blue and a bow slung across his back. His name is Clinkz, and he has traveled far to test his mettle against the best archers in the land. As the tournament begins, Clinkz steps forward, his movements graceful and precise. He knocks an arrow to his bowstring, takes aim at a distant target, and lets the arrow fly. It streaks through the air, a blur of motion, and strikes the bullseye with a resounding thud. The crowd erupts in cheers, and King Sotherex nods his approval from his throne. But there is more to Clinkz than meets the eye. Beneath his calm exterior lies a heart filled with sorrow and a thirst for vengeance, for Clinkz is the sole survivor of a village razed to the ground by the forces of a cruel and twisted sorcerer known as Malfurion. Clinkz watched helplessly as his family and friends were consumed by dark magic, their souls ripped from their bodies and twisted into grotesque abominations. Since that fateful day, Clinkz has wandered the land, honing his skills and searching for a way to avenge his loved ones. He knows that Malfurion is out there somewhere, plotting his next move, and he will stop at nothing to see the sorcerer brought to justice. As the tournament progresses, Clinkz continues to amaze the crowd with his unparalleled archery skills. Arrow after arrow finds its mark, and soon he stands alone atop the podium, the undisputed champion of Hova. King Sotherex approaches, a smile on his face, and places a hand on Clinks's shoulder. "Well done, young archer," the king says, his voice deep and resonant. "You have proven yourself worthy of a place among my elite guard, but I sense there is more to your story than meets the eye. Tell me, what brings you to my kingdom?" Clinkz hesitates for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal, but something in the king's eyes tells him that he can trust this man, that he may hold the key to unlocking the secrets of Malfurion's dark magic. "Your Majesty," Clinkz begins, his voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside him. I come seeking justice for my fallen village. A sorcerer named Malfurion destroyed everything I held dear, and I will not rest until he is brought to account for his crimes." King Sutherex's expression grows somber, and he nods slowly. "I have heard whispers of this Malfurion," he says, "a wielder of dark magic, a blight upon the land. If what you say is true, then he must be stopped at all costs." The king turns to face the crowd, his voice ringing out across the clearing. "People of Hova," he declares, "a great evil threatens our kingdom, but fear not, for we have a champion in our midst. Clinks, the archer of unparalleled skill, will lead the charge against this sorcerer and his dark forces. Together, we will rid the land of this menace and restore peace to Hova once more." The crowd erupts in cheers, and Clinks feels a surge of pride and determination. He knows that the road ahead will be fraught with danger, that Malfurion's magic is powerful and unpredictable. But with the support of King Sutherex and the people of Hova, he believes that anything is possible. As the sun begins to set over the bleeding hills, Clinks makes his way to the king's castle, ready to begin his training as a member of the elite guard. He knows that the battles to come will test him in ways he has never been tested before, but he is ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead. For Clinks is more than just an archer. He is a warrior, a survivor, a man with a mission. And he will stop at nothing to see justice served, to avenge the fallen and protect the innocent. The hunt for Malfurion has begun, and Clinks will not rest until the sorcerer is brought to his knees. As he walks through the castle gates, Clinks can feel the weight of his bow on his back, the quiver of arrows at his side. He knows that he carries the hopes and dreams of his fallen village with him, that their spirits guide his every step. And so, with a heart full of courage and a mind sharp as a blade, Clinks begins his journey into the unknown. The giant forest of Hova awaits, its secrets and dangers beckoning, but Clinks is ready. He is the archer, the champion, the hero that Hova needs, and he will not fail. Part 2. Into the dark forest. As the first rays of dawn pierce the morning mists, Clinks emerges from the king's castle, his mind focused and his resolve unwavering. The elite guard training had been grueling, pushing him to the limits of his physical and mental endurance. But through the sweat and the pain, Clinks had grown stronger, faster, more lethal than ever before. King Sutherex himself sees Clinks off, clasping his shoulder with a firm hand. "Remember, archer," he says, his voice low and solemn, "the fate of Hova rests on your shoulders. Find Malfurion and put an end to his dark reign. May the spirits of your ancestors guide your arrows true." Clinks nods, his eyes blazing with determination. "I will not fail, my king. I will hunt down this sorcerer and make him pay for his crimes against our people." With a final bow to the king, Clinks sets out, his bow at the ready and his quiver full of arrows blessed by the shamans of the court. He makes his way to the edge of the giant forest, its towering trees looming before him like ancient sentinels. As he steps into the shadowy depths, Clinks feels a prickle of unease run down his spine. The forest is unnaturally quiet, the usual chatter of birds and rustling of leaves conspicuously absent. An eerie stillness hangs in the air, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Clinks presses on, his senses on high alert. He knows that Malfurion's dark magic has corrupted the very heart of the forest, twisting its creatures into abominations of nature. He must be prepared for anything. Suddenly, a twig snaps behind him, and Clinks whirls around, his bow drawn and an arrow knocked in a flash. But what he sees stops him cold. Before him stands a creature unlike any he has ever seen before, a towering Trent, its bark gnarled and twisted, its eyes glowing with an unholy green light. In its hand, it clutches a massive club, studded with jagged spikes. "You dare enter my domain, mortal?" The Trent rumbles, its voice like the creaking of ancient wood. "You will pay for your insolence with your life." Clinks narrows his eyes, his grip tightening on his bow. "I am Clinks, archer of Hova and champion of King Sotherex," he declares, his voice ringing out through the trees. "I have come to put an end to the dark sorcerer Malfurion and his corrupted minions. Stand aside or face the consequences." The Trent lets out a bellowing laugh, its club swinging menacingly. "Foolish archer," it growls. "You have no idea of the power you face. Malfurion's magic is beyond your comprehension. You will fall, like all the others who have dared to oppose him." With a roar, the Trent charges forward, its club raised high. Clinks leaps aside, his arrows flying true. But to his horror, the arrows bounce harmlessly off the Trent's thick bark, leaving only shallow scratches. Clinks realizes with a sinking feeling that this is no ordinary foe. The Trent's hide is impervious to his arrows, protected by Malfurion's foul sorcery. He must find another way to defeat this abomination. Thinking quickly, Clinks scans his surroundings, his eyes falling on a cluster of boulders nearby. With a burst of speed, he dashes towards the rocks, the Trent lumbering after him with surprising swiftness. As he reaches the boulders, Clinks leaps atop the largest one, knocking an arrow and taking aim at the Trent's eyes. The creature bellows in rage, swinging its club wildly, but Clinks is too quick. He looses arrow after arrow, each one finding its mark in the Trent's glowing orbs. The Trent staggers back, howling in pain as sap oozes from its ruined eyes. Clinks seizes his chance, leaping down from the boulder and drawing his twin daggers from his belt. With blinding speed he darts forward, his blades flashing in the dappled sunlight. The Trent swings its club blindly, but Clinks is already gone, reappearing behind the creature and driving his daggers deep into its back. The Trent lets out a final gurgling roar before toppling to the ground, its corrupted life force seeping into the earth. Clinks stands over the fallen abomination, his chest heaving with exertion. He knows that this is only the beginning, that Malfurion's dark forces will only grow stronger the deeper he ventures into the forest. But he also knows that he is not alone. The spirits of his ancestors, the blessings of the shamans, the hopes of his people, all of these things give him strength, driving him forward on his quest for justice. As he cleans his blades on the Trent's mossy hide, Clinks hears a rustling in the underbrush nearby. He tenses, ready for another attack. But what emerges from the foliage is not a corrupted creature, but a fellow elf, a druid, judging by his green robes and gnarled staff. "Well met, archer," the druid says, his voice soft and melodic. "I am Aorin, of the Order of the Leaf. I have been tracking you since you entered the forest." Clinks eyes the druid warily, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. "And what is your purpose here, druid? Are you another of Malfurion's thralls, come to stop me?" Aorin chuckles, shaking his head. "Quite the opposite, my friend. I am here to aid you in your quest. Malfurion's corruption has spread far and wide, tainting the very lifeblood of the forest. As a druid, it is my sworn duty to protect nature and restore balance to the land. Clinks relaxes slightly, but keeps his guard up. And how do you propose to help me, druid? My arrows are useless against these abominations, and my blades can only do so much. Eorin smiles, a twinkle in his eye. Ah, but you have not yet seen the true power of nature, archer. Come, let me show you the ways of the wild, and together we will cleanse this forest of Malfurion's evil. And so, an unlikely alliance is formed between the archer and the druid, two warriors united in their quest to save Hova from the clutches of darkness. As they venture deeper into the forest, facing ever more terrifying foes and uncovering long-buried secrets, Clinks begins to understand the true scope of the task before him. But with Eorin's wisdom and the strength of his own convictions, Clinks knows that he will stop at nothing to see Malfurion brought to justice. For the sake of his fallen comrades, for the future of Hova, he will fight to his last breath. The hunt continues, and the fate of the kingdom hangs in the balance. But Clinks is ready. He is the archer, the champion, the hero that Hova needs, and he will not rest until the dark sorcerer is vanquished and peace is restored to the land once more. As Clinks and Eorin ventured deeper into the corrupted forest, the druid began to reveal the ancient secrets of nature's power. With each step, Eorin's staff glowed brighter, pulsing with an ethereal green energy that seemed to whisper to the very trees themselves. "Listen closely, archer," Eorin said, his voice low and steady. "The forest is not just a collection of trees and plants. It is a living, breathing entity with a will and a consciousness of its own. To tap into its power, you must first learn to commune with it, to understand its language and its desires." Clinks nodded, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He could feel the energy emanating from Eorin's staff, a tangible force that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. As they walked, Eorin taught Clinks the secrets of the druid's craft. He showed him how to call upon the spirits of the forest, to summon forth vines and roots to ensnare their enemies. He taught him the ancient words of power, incantations that could heal wounds and purge corruption. And as Clinks learned, he began to feel a change within himself. His arrows, once mere shafts of wood and metal, now thrummed with the power of nature. His blades, once simple tools of war, now glowed with a green fire that could cleave through the toughest of hides. Together, the archer and the druid became a force to be reckoned with. They battled their way through hordes of corrupted creatures, their combined might tearing through the ranks of Malfurion's minions like a scythe through wheat. But even as they grew stronger, the challenges they faced became ever more daunting. Deeper in the forest, they encountered twisted abominations that defied description, towering monstrosities of flesh and wood, their bodies pulsing with dark magic. It was in one such battle that Clinks first unleashed the full extent of his newfound power. Faced with a behemoth of rotting vegetation, its maw dripping with venom, the archer called upon the spirits of the forest to aid him. With a roar that shook the earth, Clinks summoned forth a maelstrom of razor-sharp leaves and thorny vines. The creature howled in agony as the verdant tempest tore through its body, shredding its putrid flesh and exposing the black heart that beat within. Seizing his chance, Clinks knocked an arrow to his bow and let fly. The shaft, imbued with the fury of nature itself, pierced the monster's heart, and with a final shuddering gasp, the abomination collapsed to the ground, its body dissolving into a pile of fetid mulch. Eorin looked on in amazement, his eyes wide with wonder. "Incredible," he breathed. "I have never seen such a display of raw natural power. You are truly a gifted warrior, Clinks." The archer merely nodded, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. He knew that this was only the beginning, that the true test of his strength was yet to come. As they journeyed ever closer to the heart of the forest, the corruption grew thicker, the air heavy with the stench of decay. Malfurion's influence was everywhere, a tangible force that seemed to press in on them from all sides. But Clinks would not be deterred. With Eorin by his side and the power of nature at his command, he knew that he could face any challenge, overcome any obstacle. And then, at last, they reached their destination. Before them stood the dark tower of Malfurion, a twisted spire of black stone that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Around its base, an army of corrupted creatures massed, their eyes glowing with unholy light. Clinks and Eorin exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. This was it, the final battle, the moment of truth. With a fierce cry, Clinks drew back his bow and let loose a volley of arrows, each one imbued with the fury of the forest. Beside him, Eorin raised his staff, calling forth roots and vines to ensnare their foes. The battle was joined, a clash of steel and magic that shook the very foundations of the earth. Clinks danced through the fray, his blades flashing in the dim light, his arrows finding their mark with unerring accuracy. Eorin, too, was a force to be reckoned with. His druidic magic tore through the ranks of the corrupted, purging them of Malfurion's taint and leaving them weakened and vulnerable. But even as they fought, Clinks could sense that something was amiss. The dark tower seemed to pulse with an evil energy, a malevolent force that grew stronger with each passing moment. And then, from the depths of the tower, a figure emerged. Tall and gaunt, clad in robes of midnight black, it was Malfurion himself, the dark sorcerer who had brought such ruin to Hova. "Foolish mortals," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can stand against me, against the power of the abyss? You are nothing, mere insects to be crushed beneath my heel." Clinks gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on his bow. "You underestimate us, sorcerer," he growled. "We are not mere mortals, but champions of nature itself, and we will not rest until you are brought to justice for your crimes." Malfurion laughed, a cold, cruel sound that sent shivers down Clinks's spine. "Justice? There is no justice in this world, Archer. Only power, and those too weak to seek it." With a wave of his hand, Malfurion summoned forth a wave of dark energy, a seething tide of corruption that swept towards Clinks and Eorin like a black tsunami. But the archer and the druid were ready. Together they called upon the full might of nature, summoning forth a verdant shield of living wood and stone. The dark magic crashed against the barrier, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. But Clinks and Eorin stood firm, their eyes blazing with determination. "You cannot win, Malfurion," Clinks said, his voice ringing with conviction. "The power of nature is greater than any dark magic you can conjure, and we will use that power to see you destroyed once and for all." With a roar of fury, Clinks charged forward, his blades flashing in the dim light. Aaron followed close behind, his staff glowing with an ethereal green energy. The final battle had begun, a desperate struggle for the fate of Hova itself. And as Clinks and Aaron clashed with Malfurion atop the Dark Tower, the very fabric of reality seemed to warp and twist around them. Spells flew back and forth, searing beams of dark magic and blasts of primal energy that shook the foundations of the tower. Clinks danced and wove through the fray, his arrows finding their mark again and again. But Malfurion was a formidable foe, his dark power seeming to grow with each passing moment. With a wave of his hand, he summoned forth tendrils of living shadow, writhing coils of darkness that sought to ensnare Clinks and Iorin in their embrace. The archer and the druid fought back with all their might, calling upon every ounce of strength and skill they possessed, but it was not enough. Slowly but surely, Malfurion's dark magic began to overwhelm them, sapping their strength and clouding their minds. In that moment, as all hope seemed lost, Clinks felt a sudden surge of power within him. It was the power of nature itself, a primal force that had lain dormant within him all this time. With a fierce cry, Clinks unleashed that power, channeling it through his bow and into a single shining arrow. The shaft, imbued with the very essence of life itself, streaked through the air like a bolt of living lightning. It struck Malfurion square in the chest, piercing his black heart and filling his body with a searing, purifying light. The dark sorcerer let out a scream of agony, his body convulsing as the corruption was burned away from his very soul. And then, with a final shuddering gasp, Malfurion collapsed to the ground, his body dissolving into a pile of ash and dust. It was over. The Dark Tower crumbled, the corrupted army scattered to the winds. Hova was saved, the balance of nature restored. Clinks and Aaron stood atop the ruins of the tower, their bodies battered and bruised, but their spirits unbroken. They had done it, had faced the darkest evil, and emerged victorious. As they looked out over the forest, now green and vibrant once more, Clinks felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had fulfilled his destiny, had avenged his fallen comrades, and saved the kingdom he held dear. But he knew that his work was not yet done. There would always be those who sought to upset the balance of nature, to plunge the world into darkness and chaos. And so, with a heavy heart, but a steely resolve, Clinks bid farewell to Iorin and set out once more into the wide world, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For he was the archer, the champion of nature, the hero that Hova needed, and he would not rest until the land was truly at peace, once and for all. Part 4. The Archer's Legacy. Clinks rode through the lush forests of Hova, his mind heavy with the weight of recent events. The battle against Malfurion had been won, but at a great cost. Many brave heroes had fallen, and the land bore the scars of the dark sorcerer's corruption. As he journeyed on, Clinks could not shake the feeling that his work was far from over. He had seen the depths of evil that lurked in the hearts of men, and he knew that there would always be those who sought to upset the balance of nature. It was during one of these moments of contemplation that Clinks heard a familiar voice calling out to him. He turned to see Iorin, the druid who had fought alongside him in the battle against Malfurion. "Clinks, my friend," Iorin said, his voice filled with urgency. "I bring grave news. A new threat has emerged. one that threatens to plunge Hova into darkness once more. Clinks's eyes narrowed. What is this threat you speak of? A powerful necromancer has arisen in the far reaches of the land, Iron explained. She calls herself Mortrid, and she seeks to raise an army of the undead to conquer all of Hova. Clinks felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard whispers of Mortrid before, a dark sorceress who commanded the powers of death itself. If she were to succeed in her plans, it would mean the end of everything he had fought for. Then we must stop her, Clinks said, his voice filled with determination. We cannot allow another evil to take root in this land. Aaron nodded. I have gathered a small group of heroes who are willing to join us in this fight. Meet me at the edge of the Whispering Woods in 3 days' time. We will make our plans there. With that, Aaron disappeared into the forest, leaving Clinks alone with his thoughts. He knew that the road ahead would be perilous, but he also knew that he could not turn away from this fight. He was the archer, the champion of nature, and he would not rest until Hova was safe. 3 days later, Clinks arrived at the appointed meeting place. There he found Aorin and a group of heroes he had never seen before. There was Sven, a mighty knight clad in shining armor, Lena, a fiery sorceress with hair the color of flame, and Rylai, a young girl with the power to control the very elements themselves. Together, they set out towards the Dark Tower where Mortrid was said to reside. As they journeyed deeper into the corrupted lands, they encountered hordes of undead creatures, twisted abominations that sought to bar their way. But Clinks and his allies fought bravely, their skills honed by countless battles. Sven's sword cleaved through the rotting flesh of the undead, while Lena's flames burned away their unholy taint. Rylai's ice magic froze entire swathes of the horde in place, allowing the others to cut them down with ease. Finally, they reached the base of Mortrid's tower, a jagged spire of obsidian that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. As they approached, a figure emerged from the shadows, her face hidden beneath a hood of deepest black. So the heroes of Hova have come to stop me, Mortrid said, her voice dripping with disdain. How foolish of you to think you could stand against the power of death itself. With a wave of her hand, Mortrid summoned forth a new horde of undead, their bodies twisted and deformed by dark magic. Clinks and his allies met them head-on, their weapons flashing in the dim light. But even as they fought, Clinks could sense that something was wrong. Mortrid's power seemed to be growing with every passing moment, her dark magic seeping into the very earth itself. We must end this now, Clinks shouted over the din of battle. Iron, Sven, hold the line. Lena, Rylai, with me. Together, the three heroes fought their way through the horde, their powers combined in a symphony of destruction. Lena's flames burned away the undead, while Rylai's ice magic shattered their bones. And all the while, Clinks's arrows found their mark, each one imbued with the power of nature itself. At last, they reached Mortrid herself, the necromancer's eyes glowing with unholy light. She raised her staff to cast a final devastating spell, but Clinks was faster. He loosed a single arrow, imbued with all the power he could muster, and watched as it streaked towards Mortrid's heart. The necromancer let out a scream of agony as the arrow found its mark, her body convulsing as the light of nature burned away the darkness within her. With a final, shuddering gasp, she collapsed to the ground, her staff clattering to the floor beside her. And with that, it was over. The undead horde crumbled to dust, the dark tower collapsing in on itself. Hova was saved once more, thanks to the bravery of Clinks and his allies. In the days that followed, the people of Hova celebrated their victory. They hailed Clinks and his companions as heroes, the saviors of the land. But even as he basked in their adulation, Clinks knew that his work was far from over, for there would always be those who sought to upset the balance of nature, to plunge the world into darkness and chaos. And as long as there were those who needed him, Clinks would be there to answer the call. He was the archer, the champion of nature, the hero that Hova needed, and he would continue to fight for the land he loved, no matter the cost. Years passed, and Clinks became a legend throughout the land. Stories of his bravery and skill spread far and wide, inspiring a new generation of heroes to take up arms in defense of Hova. And though he knew that his own time would eventually come to an end, Clinks took comfort in the knowledge that his legacy would live on. For as long as there were those who believed in the power of nature, in the balance that must be maintained, his spirit would endure. And so, as he rode off into the sunset, his bow slung across his back and his heart filled with hope, Clinks knew that he had fulfilled his destiny. He had become the archer that Hova needed, the hero that would be remembered for generations to come. The end. Here is part 5 of the story, continuing from the previous part. Years turned to decades, and decades to centuries. The legend of Clinks, the archer who saved Hova in its darkest hour, only grew with each passing generation. Parents told the tale to their children as they tucked them into bed at night, and bards sang of his deeds in taverns and great halls across the land. But even as Clinks passed into myth and legend, the world of Hova endured. The sacred balance he had fought so hard to protect remained intact, nature and civilization existing in harmony. The dark forces that once threatened the land were but a distant memory until they weren't. In a remote corner of Hova, far from the bustling cities and peaceful forests, something stirred in the shadows. An ancient evil, long thought vanquished, began to awaken. Slowly at first, then with growing speed and hunger, it spread its corruption across the land, poisoning all it touched. Fields withered and died. Animals grew twisted and savage. The very earth seemed to cry out in pain. And in the midst of it all, a figure cloaked in darkness, its eyes burning with malevolent power. A new necromancer, more terrible than any who had come before. As news of this fresh threat spread, panic gripped the people of Hova. Many fled their homes, seeking safety in the great walled cities. Others took up arms, determined to fight the evil just as Clinks had centuries ago. But it was all for naught. The necromancer's power was too great. One by one, the cities fell until only the capital remained. It was there, in the great hall of kings, that a desperate plan was hatched. Using ancient magic, a group of the most powerful mages in Hova reached out across the boundaries of time and space. They sought the spirit of Clinks himself to summon the legendary archer back to the mortal realm in Hova's hour of greatest need. Against all odds, the spell worked. In a blinding flash of emerald light, Clinks materialized in the center of the hall, his bow in hand and a quiver of arrows at his back. He looked exactly as the legends described, proud and strong, with an aura of nature's power that seemed to fill the room. "Why have you summoned me?" Clinks demanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. The mages quickly explained the situation. The rising of the necromancer, the fall of the cities, the impending doom that threatened to engulf all of Hova. As he listened, Clinks's expression grew grim. "I defeated one such as this before," he said. "I will do so again." But even as he spoke, Clinks knew that this battle would be his greatest challenge yet. The necromancer was more powerful than Mordred had ever been, commanding legions of undead soldiers and wielding dark magic, the likes of which Hova had never seen. Still, Clinkz did not hesitate. Armed with his trusty bow and a fierce determination, he set out from the capital, making his way towards the heart of the necromancer's domain. The journey was long and perilous, through blighted wastelands and forests of twisted, unnatural growth. Many brave warriors joined Clinks on his quest, drawn by his legend and inspired by his courage. Together, they fought through hordes of undead, facing down monstrous abominations and dark sorcery at every turn. With each victory, their resolve only grew stronger. Finally, they reached their destination, a great obsidian tower, rising like a spike of darkness into the turbulent sky, the necromancer's stronghold. As they approached, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the necromancer himself, more terrible than any of them could have imagined. "So," the necromancer hissed, "the great Clinks returns. I've heard the tales of you, but you're too late. Hova is mine now." Clinks knocked an arrow to his bow. "Not while I still draw breath." What followed was a battle unlike any in Hova's history. Clinks and his allies fought with unmatched skill and bravery, raining arrows and spells down upon the necromancer and his minions. But the Dark One's power was vast, and for each undead that fell, two more seemed to take its place. As the battle raged on, Clinks found himself face to face with the necromancer. The two engaged in a duel that would be remembered for ages. Bow against staff, nature against necromancy, light against darkness. Ultimately, it was Clinks who emerged victorious. With a final, mighty shot, he pierced the necromancer's black heart, and the Dark One crumbled to dust with an agonized scream. With their master's demise, the undead horde collapsed, the corruption that had gripped Hova withering away. In the aftermath of the great battle, the people of Hova once again hailed Clinks as their savior. But the archer knew his time in the mortal world was short. Already he could feel himself fading, drawn back to the spirit realm from whence he came. "Remember this," Clinks said to the assembled crowds. "The balance of nature is a delicate thing. It must be protected, nurtured. That duty falls to you now." With that, Clinks vanished, leaving behind a land that would never forget his sacrifice, his bravery, his legend. And though the archer was gone, his spirit lived on in every leaf on every tree, in every arrow fired in defense of the innocent, in every heart that cherished the sacred balance. For he was Clinks, the archer of Hova, and his watch had no end. Part 6. The Echoes of Legend. Years turned to decades and decades to centuries. The tale of Clinks, the archer of Hova, passed into legend, a story told around hearths on chill winter nights, a rallying cry for those who would defend the natural order. And though the archer himself had long since faded into the spirit world, his impact on the land of Hova endured. Generations came and went. each one learning the lessons of Clinks' sacrifice. The people of Hova became fierce defenders of their verdant homeland, skilled archers and rangers who patrolled the borders, ever vigilant against the forces that would seek to upset the balance. But as time wore on, a new threat emerged. Whispers began to circulate of a growing darkness in the lands beyond Hova's borders, of a malevolent force that consumed all in its path. Some said it was the vengeful spirit of the vanquished necromancer, returned from the abyss to wreak havoc on the living. Others spoke of an even older evil, a primordial darkness that had slumbered for eons and now stirred in the depths. Regardless of its origin, one thing was clear. This darkness posed a threat unlike any Hova had faced before. Slowly, inexorably, it crept towards the emerald forests, a creeping blight that left nothing but decay and despair in its wake. Faced with this looming menace, the leaders of Hova convened an urgent council. For days they debated, arguing over the best course of action. Some advocated for a preemptive strike, to march out and meet this enemy head-on. Others counseled caution, warning that they knew too little of this new foe to risk open warfare. As the debate reached a fever pitch, a strange thing happened. A gust of wind swept through the council chamber, carrying with it a swirl of glowing embers. The embers coalesced at the center of the room, growing brighter and brighter until they formed a shimmering spectral figure. It was Clinks, the archer of Hova, returned from the spirit world in Hova's hour of need. A hush fell over the assembled leaders as the ghostly archer spoke. His voice was like the whisper of wind through autumn leaves, but his words carried the weight of ages. "The threat you face is dire," Clinks said, his spectral eyes sweeping over the council. "A darkness that seeks to consume all, to unravel the very fabric of nature itself. It cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with. It must be fought." The archer's gaze settled on a young ranger in the crowd, a prodigy named Lyra, who had already earned a reputation as one of Hova's most gifted archers. "The task will fall to you, and to those like you," Clinks said. "You must become more than rangers, more than defenders. You must become a light against the darkness, a beacon of hope in the coming battle." With those words, the archer began to fade, his form dissipating into motes of light. But as he disappeared, a change came over those gathered. They felt a surge of courage, of determination, a resolve to face the coming darkness no matter the cost. In the days that followed, Lyra and her fellow rangers began their training in earnest. They honed their skills with bow and blade, learned to move unseen through the forests, to read the signs of nature. But more than that, they learned to draw upon the spirit of Hova itself, to channel the power of the living world in defense of the balance. As the darkness drew nearer, the rangers of Hova stood ready. They knew the battle ahead would be the greatest test they had ever faced. But they also knew they did not stand alone. The spirit of Clinks was with them, a guiding light in the gathering dark. And so, when the shadow finally fell across the borders of Hova, they met it head on. Lyra and her comrades fought with a skill and ferocity that would have made Clinks himself proud, their arrows finding their marks with unerring precision, their blades flashing in the eerie twilight. The battle raged for days, the fate of Hova hanging in the balance. The darkness was powerful, its minions legion. But the rangers of Hova were unyielding, driven by a courage and conviction that no shadow could dim. In the end, it was Lyra who turned the tide. In a moment of desperation, with the darkness closing in from all sides, she called upon the full power of Hova's spirit. A blinding light erupted from her, a radiance that pierced the darkness like a lance. The shadows recoiled, their hold on the land broken. With a final triumphant cry, the rangers of Hova pressed their advantage. The darkness was driven back, banished to the abyss from whence it came. Hova was saved, the balance preserved. In the aftermath of the great battle, as the people of Hova celebrated their victory, Lyra stood apart, gazing into the tranquil forests. She knew that this was not the end, that the darkness would return. It was the nature of things, the eternal cycle of light and shadow, but she also knew that Hova would always stand ready, that there would always be those willing to take up the mantle of Clinks, to become a beacon in the dark. For that was the legacy of the archer, a light that would endure as long as the spirit of Hova itself. And so, the legend of Clinks lived on, a testament to the enduring power of courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit of nature itself. In the heart of every ranger, in the whisper of every wind through the leaves, his presence could be felt, a guiding force that would forever shape the destiny of Hova. For in the end, it was not the strength of arms or the power of magic that held the darkness at bay. It was the light of the living world, the unbreakable bond between the land and its defenders. And as long as that light endured, Hova would stand, a bastion of life and hope in an ever-darkening world. As the echoes of the great battle faded into memory, life in Hova slowly returned to its natural rhythm. The forests, once choked by the oppressive darkness, now thrummed with renewed vitality. The sun's rays, no longer strangled by the encroaching shadows, dappled the woodland floor, nurturing the tender shoots that sprouted from the earth. Lyra, now hailed as the savior of Hova, found herself at the center of a great celebration. The people of the land, from the humblest farmer to the most esteemed elder, gathered to honor her courage and sacrifice. They draped her in garlands of wildflowers, their delicate petals a testament to the resilience of life in the face of darkness. But amidst the joy and revelry, Lyra could not shake a sense of unease. She had seen the true power of the darkness, felt its icy grip on her very soul. She knew that this respite was but a fleeting moment in an eternal struggle. As the festivities wound down and the people of Hova returned to their daily lives, Lyra sought solitude in the heart of the forest. It was here, in the quiet spaces between the ancient trees, that she could truly commune with the spirit of the land. She closed her eyes, letting her consciousness drift on the currents of the forest's energy. In her mind's eye, she saw the countless generations of rangers who had come before her, their spirits forever entwined with the living world. And there, at the center of it all, was Clinks himself, his essence a pulsing beacon of light amidst the green. "Great Archer," Lyra whispered, her voice barely a ripple in the tranquil air. "Guide me. Show me the path forward." For a long moment there was only silence, the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then, like a whisper on the edge of hearing, a voice spoke in Lyra's mind. "The path is within you, Lyra of Hova," the voice said, its tone at once ancient and youthful, wise and mischievous. "You are the light that holds the darkness at bay, but light casts shadows, and in those shadows the enemy grows strong. Lyra's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that voice, had heard it in countless tales and legends. It was the voice of Clinks himself, the spirit of the archer, given form. "What must I do?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and trepidation. "You must become more than a ranger," Clinks said, his form shimmering into view before her, a spectral silhouette wreathed in emerald light. "You must become a guardian of the balance, a keeper of the sacred flame that burns at the heart of Hova." Lyra bowed her head, the weight of this new destiny settling upon her shoulders. She had always known that her path was one of service to the land, but this was a calling that transcended even her wildest imaginings. "I am ready," she said, her voice steady with resolve. "Teach me, great archer, show me the way." And so began Lyra's true training, a journey that would take her to the very edges of the living world and beyond. Under Clinks's spectral tutelage, she learned to wield the powers of nature itself, to call upon the fury of the storm and the resilience of the oak. She ventured deep into the wilds, seeking out the ancient groves and sacred springs where the power of Hova ran strongest. She communed with the spirits of the land, learning their secrets and earning their trust. As her power grew, so too did her understanding of the true nature of the balance. She saw how the forces of light and darkness were forever intertwined, each defining the other in an eternal dance of creation and destruction. She saw how the darkness, for all its malevolence, served a vital purpose, culling the weak and the sickly, making way for new growth. And she saw how the light, untempered by shadow, could be just as destructive, burning away diversity and nuance in a blaze of self-righteous purity. It was a lesson that Lyra took to heart, a wisdom that would guide her in the trials to come. For even as she grew in power and understanding, the darkness was not idle. Deep in the hidden places of the world, the shadows gathered, licking their wounds and plotting their revenge. They whispered of a new champion, a being of pure malevolence that would rise to challenge the guardians of Hova. Lyra heard these whispers, carried to her on the wind and the rustling of leaves. She knew that the true test of her newfound power was fast approaching, that the fate of Hova would once again hang in the balance. But she was ready. With the spirit of Clinks at her side and the power of the living world coursing through her veins, she would stand against the darkness, a beacon of hope in an age of gathering shadows. For she was Lyra, Ranger of Hova, guardian of the balance, and she would not falter, would not yield, until the light of life once again reigned supreme over the land she called home. As the days turned to weeks and the weeks to months, Lyra's legend grew. Tales of her exploits spread far and wide, carried on the tongues of travelers and the wings of birds. They spoke of a ranger, unlike any other, a woman who could call down the fury of the heavens and make the very earth tremble beneath her feet. Some said she was blessed by the gods themselves, a chosen champion of the living world. Others whispered that she was something more, a being of pure nature, as much a part of the forest as the trees and the streams. But to the people of Hova, she was simply Lyra, their protector and their friend. They came to her with their troubles and their joys, seeking her wisdom and her comfort, and she gave it freely, for she knew that the strength of Hova lay not in the power of individuals, but in the bonds of community and trust. Even as Lyra's power and influence grew, she never lost sight of her true purpose. She was a guardian of the balance, a keeper of the sacred flame. Her duty was not to herself, but to the land and all who called it home. And so, when the whispers of a new threat began to reach her ears, Lyra did not hesitate. She gathered her allies, the bravest and most skilled of Hova's rangers, and set out to meet the darkness head-on. They journeyed deep into the wilds, to places where the shadow lay thick and heavy upon the land. They battled monstrous creatures of nightmare and darkness, beings that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. But Lyra's power was strong, and her companions were true. With arrow and blade, with spell and spirit, they drove back the darkness, reclaiming the land inch by hard-fought inch. It was during one of these battles that Lyra first encountered the champion of the darkness, a being of such malevolence that the very air seemed to recoil in its presence. It was a creature of shadow and flame, a twisted mockery of life that sought only to consume and destroy. Lyra knew that this was the true test, the moment that would define her legacy. With a cry of defiance, she unleashed the full might of her power, calling upon the spirits of the land to aid her in this final, desperate struggle. The battle was fierce and terrible, a cataclysm of light and shadow that shook the very foundations of the world. But in the end, it was Lyra who emerged victorious, the champion of the darkness vanquished and the balance restored. But even as the people of Hova celebrated their triumph, Lyra knew that the struggle was far from over. The darkness had been defeated, but it would return, as it always had and always would. For such was the nature of the balance, an eternal cycle of light and shadow, of life and death and rebirth. And as long as there were those like Lyra, those willing to stand against the darkness, the light would never truly fade. And so Lyra took up her bow once more, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. For she was a ranger of Hova, a guardian of the balance, and she would fight for the light, for the land, and for all the living world until her last breath and beyond. Such is the legend of Lyra, the savior of Hova, the inheritor of Clinks's legacy. May her story be a beacon of hope to all who hear it, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of courage and compassion will always endure. As the echoes of the great battle faded into memory, Lyra found herself haunted by a growing sense of unease. Though the champion of darkness had been vanquished, she could feel the tendrils of its malevolence still lingering in the shadows, waiting for the opportune moment to strike once more. Seeking guidance, Lyra journeyed to the ancient grove where the spirits of the land were said to dwell. There, amidst the whispering leaves and the soft glow of enchanted fireflies, she knelt before the great oak that stood at the heart of the grove, its gnarled branches reaching towards the heavens like the fingers of a wizened old sage. "Great spirits," Lyra intoned, her voice soft and reverent, "I seek your wisdom in these troubled times. The darkness has been beaten back, but I fear that it is not yet truly vanquished. What must I do to ensure the safety of Hova and its people?" For a long moment there was only silence, broken by the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then, slowly, a voice seemed to emanate from the very earth itself, ancient and powerful, filled with the weight of countless centuries. "Lyra, child of the land," the voice intoned, You have done well to defeat the champion of darkness. But know that this is only the beginning of your journey. The darkness is not so easily vanquished, and it will seek to corrupt and destroy all that you hold dear. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine at the spirit's words. "Then what must I do?" she asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "How can I protect my people from this threat?" "You must seek out the ancient relics of power," the spirit replied, its voice growing stronger and more insistent. "The items that were once wielded by the greatest heroes of old. Only with their might can you hope to stand against the darkness and prevail." Lyra's eyes widened at the spirit's words. She had heard the legends of the ancient relics, powerful artifacts that were said to hold the very essence of the elements themselves. But they had been lost to the mists of time, their locations known only to a select few. "Where can I find these relics?" Lyra asked, her voice filled with determination. "I will do whatever it takes to claim them and use their power to protect my people." The spirit's voice grew distant, as if it were receding back into the earth from whence it came. "Seek out the keepers of the relics," it said, its words growing fainter with each passing moment. "They will guide you on your path, but be warned, child of the land, the darkness will stop at nothing to claim the relics for itself. You must be strong, and you must be true, if you are to prevail." With those final words, the spirit's presence faded, leaving Lyra alone in the grove, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger, but she also knew that she could not turn away from her duty. Rising to her feet, Lyra strode out of the grove, her bow clutched tightly in her hand. She would seek out the keepers of the relics, and with their aid, she would claim the ancient artifacts of power. And with their might, she would stand against the darkness, a beacon of hope and light in a world threatened by shadow. As she journeyed forth, Lyra's mind turned to her companions, the brave souls who had stood by her side through all the trials and tribulations of the past. There was Malik, the stalwart warrior whose blade had felled countless foes; Zephyr, the mage whose mastery of the arcane arts was unmatched; and Arya, the healer whose gentle touch could mend even the most grievous of wounds. Together they had faced down the horrors of the darkness, and together they would do so again. For they were more than just comrades in arms. They were family, bound by ties of love and loyalty that ran deeper than blood. But even as Lyra took comfort in the presence of her friends, she knew that the road ahead would test them all to their very limits. The darkness was cunning and relentless, and it would stop at nothing to claim the relics for itself. Their first stop was the village of Millhaven, a small settlement nestled in the foothills of the Iron Spine Mountains. It was said that one of the keepers of the relics dwelled there, a sage of great wisdom and power. As they approached the village gates, Lyra could sense a palpable aura of unease hanging over the settlement. The streets were deserted, and the windows of the houses were shuttered tight, as if the inhabitants were hiding from some unseen threat. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a hunched and twisted creature with skin the color of ash and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly malevolence. It was a demon hound, one of the twisted abominations that served the darkness. With a snarl of rage, the creature lunged at Lyra, its razor-sharp claws slashing through the air. But Malik was there to meet it, his blade flashing in the sunlight as he parried the creature's attack and drove it back with a mighty blow. Zephyr and Arya were quick to join the fray, their magic and healing arts bolstering their companions as they fought against the demon hound. The battle was fierce and brutal, but in the end, the creature lay dead at their feet, its twisted form slowly dissolving into a foul black ichor. Breathing heavily, Lyra turned to her companions, a grim expression on her face. "The darkness is here," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "We must find the keeper of the relic before it's too late." They pressed on into the village, their senses alert for any sign of danger. The streets were eerily silent, save for the occasional skittering of unseen creatures in the shadows. Suddenly, a voice called out to them, weak and trembling with age. "Who goes there?" it said, its tone filled with fear and suspicion. Lyra stepped forward, her bow lowered in a gesture of peace. "We are travelers seeking the keeper of the relic," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "We mean you no harm." There was a moment of silence, and then a figure emerged from one of the houses, an old man with a long white beard and eyes that sparkled with wisdom. "I am the one you seek," he said, his voice filled with weariness. "But I fear that you have come too late." Lyra's heart sank at the old man's words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with desperation. The old man sighed, his shoulders slumping with the weight of his years. "The darkness has already claimed the relic," he said, his voice filled with sorrow. "I was unable to stop them, and now they wield its power for their own twisted ends." Lyra exchanged a glance with her companions, her mind racing with the implications of the old man's words. If the darkness had already claimed one of the relics, then their task had just become infinitely more difficult. But she refused to give in to despair. She had faced down the darkness before, and she would do so again. With the aid of her companions and the power of the remaining relics, she would find a way to prevail. Turning back to the old man, Lyra spoke, her voice filled with determination. "Tell us what you know of the other relics," she said, her eyes blazing with resolve. "We will not rest until we have claimed them all and used their power to defeat the darkness once and for all." The old man nodded, a faint smile playing across his weathered features. "Very well," he said, his voice filled with admiration for the young ranger's courage. "Listen closely, for the path ahead is fraught with danger, and the fate of Hova rests upon your shoulders." As the old sage began to speak, Lyra and her companions listened intently, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew that the road ahead would be long and perilous, but they also knew that they could not turn away from their duty, for they were the guardians of Hova, the inheritors of Clinks' legacy, and they would fight for the light, for the land, and for all the living world until their last breath and beyond. Thus continues the legend of Lyra and her companions, as they set forth on a quest to claim the ancient relics of power and use their might to vanquish the darkness once and for all. May their courage and devotion be a beacon of hope to all who follow in their footsteps, a shining example of the indomitable spirit of the Rangers of Hova. As the old sage's words faded into the stillness of the ancient chamber, Lyra felt a renewed sense of purpose coursing through her veins. She exchanged determined glances with her companions, Traxex the Drow Ranger, Sven the Rogue Knight, and Rubik the Grand Magus. Together they had faced countless trials and emerged victorious. but the path that lay ahead would test them like never before. The next relic lies hidden deep within the night silver woods, the old man revealed, his eyes distant as if peering into another realm. It is an ancient talisman, imbued with the power to control the very fabric of shadow itself. In the wrong hands, it could plunge all of Hova into eternal darkness. Lyra nodded gravely, her mind already racing with the challenges that awaited them. The night silver woods were a place of legend, whispered about in hushed tones by those who dared to venture near its borders. It was said that the very trees themselves were alive with malevolent intent, their branches reaching out to ensnare unwary travelers. "We must set out at once," Treacherous said, her voice as cold and unyielding as the ice that ran through her veins. "Every moment we delay is a moment that the darkness grows stronger." Sven nodded his agreement, his hand resting on the hilt of his massive sword. "Aye, the drow speaks true. We've no time to waste on idle chatter. Let us gather our gear and be on our way." Rubik, however, seemed lost in thought, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The Talisman of Shadow," he murmured, almost to himself. "I have heard whispers of its power, but never dared to believe them true. If the legends are to be believed, it is an artifact of immense potential, capable of bending the very laws of nature to its wielder's will." Lyra placed a hand on the Magus's shoulder, her eyes filled with understanding. "That is why we must claim it before the darkness does," she said softly. "In the right hands, it could be a powerful force for good. But in the wrong hands," she left the thought unfinished, but they all knew the terrible implications of her words. The darkness had already claimed one relic, and they could not allow it to claim another. With a final nod of thanks to the old sage, the four companions gathered their gear and set out from the ancient chamber, their footsteps echoing through the silent halls of the temple. Outside, the world was in turmoil, the once peaceful lands of Hova, now plagued by the encroaching darkness. But Lyra and her companions knew that they were the only hope for turning the tide. As they journeyed towards the night silver woods, the companions fell into a familiar rhythm, their steps in perfect sync as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Lyra took the lead, her keen senses alert for any sign of danger. Treacherous followed close behind, her bow at the ready, while Sven and Rubik brought up the rear, their combined might a force to be reckoned with. For days they traveled, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion as they raced against the clock. They knew that every moment they delayed was a moment that the darkness grew stronger, its tendrils spreading across the land like a cancerous growth. At last, they reached the borders of the night silver woods, the ancient trees looming before them like silent sentinels. Lyra could feel the malevolent energy emanating from the forest, a palpable force that set her teeth on edge. "Stay alert," she warned her companions, her voice low and urgent. "The woods will not give up their secrets easily. We must be prepared for anything." As they stepped across the threshold and into the shadowy depths of the forest, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant cry of some unseen creature. Deeper and deeper they pushed into the heart of the woods, guided only by the faint glimmer of Rubik's arcane light. The trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches reaching out as if to snatch at their clothes and hair. Suddenly, without warning, The shadows came alive around them. Dark forms detached themselves from the trees, their eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. Lyra and her companions reacted instantly, their weapons leaping into their hands as they fell into a defensive formation. The shadow creatures attacked with a savage fury, their claws raking at the companions' armor as they sought to overwhelm them with sheer numbers. But Lyra and her friends were no strangers to battle, and they met the onslaught with a fierce determination. Traxxex's bow sang a deadly song as she loosed arrow after arrow into the writhing mass of shadows, each one finding its mark with unerring precision. Sven's sword cleaved through the creatures like a scythe through wheat, his mighty blade glowing with an inner fire. Rubik's magic was a thing of wonder, his arcane bolts searing through the shadows and leaving them writhing in agony. And Lyra was a whirlwind of steel and fury, her twin blades flashing in the dim light as she danced among the creatures, leaving a trail of shattered bodies in her wake. But even as they fought, Lyra could sense that something was amiss. The shadow creatures seemed to be driven by a purpose beyond mere animalistic savagery, their movements coordinated and precise. And in the distance, she could feel a dark presence watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Suddenly, a piercing scream rent the air, and Lyra whirled to see Traxxex stumbling back, a shadowy claw protruding from her shoulder. The Drow Ranger's face was a mask of pain, but she gritted her teeth and continued to fight, her movements growing slower and more labored with each passing moment. Sven leapt to her aid, his sword cleaving through the creature that had wounded her. But more and more of the shadows were pouring out of the trees now, their numbers seeming to grow with each passing second. Rubik's face was a mask of concentration as he wove a complex web of arcane energy around the companions, shielding them from the worst of the onslaught. But even his prodigious magic could not hold back the tide forever. Lyra knew that they were running out of time. The talisman was close. She could feel its power calling to her like a siren song. But the shadows were relentless, and she could see the toll the battle was taking on her companions. With a cry of desperation, she summoned the last reserves of her strength and leapt forward, her blades flashing in a whirlwind of steel. She carved a path through the seething mass of shadows, her every movement a symphony of deadly gray. And there, at the heart of the maelstrom, she saw it, a small, unassuming talisman, its surface etched with ancient runes that seemed to writhe and twist before her eyes. Lyra lunged forward, her fingers closing around the artifact, just as a wave of shadows crashed over her, threatening to drag her down into oblivion. But even as the darkness closed in around her, Lyra could feel the talisman's power surging through her veins, a rush of pure, unadulterated energy that set every nerve in her body alight. With a cry of triumph, she unleashed that power in a searing blast of light that shattered the shadows like glass, sending them fleeing back into the depths of the forest. As the light faded, Lyra staggered to her feet, the talisman clutched tightly in her hand. Her companions crowded around her, their faces a mix of relief and awe. "You did it," Rubik breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. "The talisman is ours," Lyra nodded, a grim smile playing across her lips. "But the battle is far from over," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of the task that lay ahead. "The darkness will not rest until it has claimed the talisman for itself. We must be ready for whatever comes next." As they emerged from the night silver woods, battered but unbroken, Lyra knew that the road ahead would be long and treacherous. But with the talisman in their possession and the strength of their bond to guide them, she knew that they would prevail, for they were the guardians of Hova, the inheritors of Clinks' legacy, and they would fight for the light, no matter the cost. Part 10. The Gathering Storm. The journey back from the Night Silver Woods was a somber one, the weight of their victory tempered by the knowledge of the trials that lay ahead. Lyra could feel the talisman's power thrumming through her veins, a constant reminder of the burden she now bore. As they made their way across the rolling hills and sweeping plains of Hova, Lyra's thoughts turned to Clinks, the legendary archer whose legacy they now carried. She wondered what he would have made of their quest, of the sacrifices they had already endured and the challenges that still awaited them. Lost in her musings, Lyra almost didn't notice when Rubik fell into step beside her, his eyes filled with concern. "You've been quiet since we left the woods," he said softly. "Is everything all right?" Lyra sighed, shaking her head. "I just can't help but wonder if we're doing the right thing," she confessed. "The talisman's power is immense, but so too is the danger it poses. What if we're not strong enough to control it?" Rubik laid a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We are strong enough," he said firmly. "We have each other, and we have the wisdom of those who came before us. We will not fail." As they crested a hill, the city of Lunaris came into view, its soaring spires and gleaming domes a welcome sight after the darkness of the woods. But even from a distance, Lyra could sense that something was amiss. The streets were empty, the usual bustle of city life replaced by an eerie silence. As they drew closer, they saw that the buildings were draped in black, the windows shuttered and barred. "What happened here?" Lyra whispered, a chill running down her spine. Rubik shook his head, his brow furrowed. "I don't know," he said grimly, "but I fear we are about to find out." As they entered the city gates, they were greeted by a scene of utter devastation. The once proud buildings lay in ruins, their walls scorched and crumbling. The air was thick with the acrid tang of smoke and the coppery scent of blood. And there, in the center of the square, stood a figure that made Lyra's blood run cold. It was a creature of pure shadow, its form shifting and writhing like smoke in the wind. Its eyes burned with a malevolent red light, and in its clawed hands it held a jagged blade that seemed to drink in the light around it. "So, the guardians of Hova have come at last," the creature hissed, its voice like the scrape of metal on stone. "You are too late. The city is ours, and soon the talisman will be as well." Lyra stepped forward, her blades held high. "You will never claim the talisman," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "We will fight you to our last breath." The creature laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Lyra's spine. "You are welcome to try," it sneered, "but you will fall, just as this city has fallen. Just as all of Hova will fall before the might of the Shadow Council." With a roar of fury, Lyra charged forward, her blades flashing in the dim light. The creature met her blow for blow, its own blade a blur of darkness that seemed to suck the very light from the air. Around them, the ruins of Lunaris erupted into chaos as more shadow creatures emerged from the rubble, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Rubik and the others leapt into action, their own weapons and magic joining the fray. But even as they fought, Lyra could feel the weight of the talisman growing heavier. its power pulsing in time with her own heartbeat. She knew that they could not win this battle alone, that they needed help from beyond the borders of Hova. As if in answer to her thoughts, a shimmering portal suddenly appeared in the center of the square, its edges crackling with arcane energy. Lyra's eyes widened as a figure stepped through, his form wreathed in a halo of golden light. It was Zeus, the Lord of Heaven, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. "Halt, creatures of shadow!" he commanded, his voice booming like thunder. "You have no place in this realm." The shadow creatures hesitated, their red eyes flickering with uncertainty. But the leader of the Shadow Council merely laughed, its blade slashing through the air in defiance. "You have no power here, old man," it snarled. "The talisman will be ours, and with it all of creation will tremble before us." Zeus's eyes narrowed, and he raised his hands, lightning crackling between his fingertips. "You underestimate the power of the gods," he said softly, "and the strength of those who fight for what is right." With a blinding flash of light, Zeus unleashed a bolt of pure energy that struck the leader of the Shadow Council square in the chest, sending it flying backwards into the rubble. The other shadow creatures scattered, their forms dissolving into wisps of smoke as they fled. Lyra stared at Zeus in awe, her heart pounding in her chest. "You saved us," she whispered. "Thank you." Zeus smiled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Do not thank me yet, young guardian," he said. "The battle is far from over. The Shadow Council will not rest until they have claimed the talisman for their own." Rubik stepped forward, his face grave. "What can we do?" he asked. "How can we stop them?" Zeus's expression grew serious. "You must seek out the other guardians," he said. "Only together will you have the strength to face the Shadow Council and put an end to their dark ambitions." Lyra nodded, her resolve hardening. "We will find them," she vowed, "and we will stand together against the darkness, no matter the cost." As Zeus vanished back through the portal, Lyra turned to her companions, her eyes shining with determination. "We have a long road ahead of us," she said, "but we will not falter. We are the guardians of Hova, and we will fight for the light until our last breath." With that, they set out from the ruins of Lunaris, their hearts heavy with the weight of their task, but their spirits unbroken. The gathering storm of the Shadow Council loomed on the horizon, but Lyra knew that they would face it head-on, armed with the power of the talisman and the strength of their bond. For they were the inheritors of Clinks' legacy, the protectors of the realm, and they would not rest until Hova was safe once more.